Hello, welcome to another edition of the Pace Report. I'm Brian Pace, reporting live here at Mezzrow, here in the heart of the West Village, here in New York City. Growing up in the late 80s and early 90s, on Sunday afternoon I would sneak off from church and get in my parents' car in the parking lot and turn on WFYI and listen to Sidran on Record, hosted by broadcaster, producer, writer, journalist, and pianist Ben Sidran. Now in that hour, I would listen to some very iconic interviews with some of the world's greatest jazz musicians. And also, he would also produce a show late at night on VH1 called New Visions, in which he exposed the world to the likes of Harry Connick Jr., the World Saxophone Quartet, David Byrne, even Wynton Marsalis, Courtney Pine, just to name the many endless few. It was through him and also Dr. Billy Taylor where I got really bit by the bug of not only studying and researching this music, but also supporting it and creating what we now know as the Pace Report. Tonight here I'm honored to break bread as well as introduce you guys to Ben playing music from his brand new record, Are We There Yet?, which is a brand new live album which he recorded over in Paris last summer. Tonight we sit down and we break bread and we reflect on the life of his mentor, the great Tommy LiPuma. Also, we sit down and talk about the role of a record producer, as well as we sit down and remember some of the great moments of Sidran on Record, as well as Visions. So sit back, relax, and enjoy highlights of Ben Sidran performing here live at Mezzrow, here on the Pace Report, here in the West Village, here in New York City.
Everything is fair. You try to find some reason in a world where there's none. There's just this rock, this hill, and this god-awful sun. Now there's a change for $1, there's a change for a dime. You wanna change your life, you got to change your mind. You got the picture, you got to picture him happy. Yeah, the picture. desperate minds, they need desperate distractions. The sun is so hot you can't even breathe the air, and it's an eye for an eye, and everything is fair. You try to find some meaning in a world where there's none. It's just this rock and this hill and this god-awful sun. Now when you get near the top, you find a terrible film and see another man, another rock going up another hill. You got to picture him happy. 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 That's right. You see another man, another rock. He's going up another hill.
This live album, you were in Paris, and the Parisians love our music, our culture, and the thing about this record that I like is that there's an intimacy level to what you're bringing to your fans, and you're more of a storyteller as opposed to a piano player. How did you bring this vibe about?
Well, you know, it's go toward your strength, and I think as a musician, you kind of mature when you're 18, 19 years old. I mean, you keep playing, you keep practicing, but most of the progress is made while you're young. And so when I was finally a college graduate and confronted with putting together a musical career, I had the piano facility that I had, and even though I kept playing, that was part of my facility. So I was looking for a way to tell my historical perspective. I mean, I think of playing music as a form of journalism, you know, just like if you write a story, well, they always say, you know, tell your story when you're playing. And so how do I tell my story? And so I modeled myself in part on Mose Allison, who had a lot of humor and was steeped in the blues, but at the same time, you know, he was a big reader. He loved literature. Bob Dylan, who used the language of the streets to talk the way people normally talk, but he put it into music. John Hendricks, because John was, you know, everything he did swung, and so I put these things together, not consciously. I mean, they came together over years and over gigs and finding what felt comfortable. And I found after literally 10 years, I mean, I started as a professional player around 1971, and I would say by 1981, I had figured out where my voice was and what I could do that other people didn't do. And of course, that's the whole goal, is to find out what you have to contribute. And what I do works best in an intimate environment. I mean, it's nice to play concerts because you can get paid, but for me, to make it work, small room, people who want to be next to the fire, you know. And you're right, in France, historically, there has always been a tradition of Americans being somewhat exotic and being on some kind of a cutting edge, certainly when it comes to music. And people come out and they want to get next to the fire. So that's the coming together of my style and where we recorded.
You know, as I was watching the first set, you know, the stories are very compelling. You're conversational and not confrontational. And that's, musicians can be confrontational when they're playing music and they don't say anything in between the songs.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can pull people away, but in this particular set, you were telling history about the poet who went to
Spain.
Yeah.
No, I talk about it. I think it's one of the things that I can bring, because it's my interest. It's my area of interest. I've always been fascinated by how history plays out, and especially how history plays out in popular culture. You know, the difference between what the academies say is history and history on the streets. And jazz is street art that's raised to a high art. I mean, it's very difficult to play jazz, but at the same time, jazz was, and in many ways still is, popular music. So it's a special case of a special case. And so I find the easiest way to bring that across is to demystify people. You know, you're not doing anybody any favors if you come up to them and go, "Oh man, you're so great, you're so far above the rest of us." No, man, you are of us. We are here together. You know, when you present a great piece of music, you raise all of us up. That's our music. So when I tell my little stories or my little history, my goal is to come across to the audience that this music has a lot of roots and a lot of places, and it's legitimate for you to follow that up, and that furthers your participation with the music.
It's funny you brought that up, because when I was watching your television show New Visions and listening to Sidran on record, the camaraderie that you had with the musicians accidentally pulled out stories and intricate parts of our history that it went in very different directions.
Yeah.
And I have to ask you, with you interacting with so many musicians and icons over the years, what is it the things that you've instilled upon your son, as well as other journalists and other musicians that are playing this music and even writing about the music and the culture?
Well, I had a couple of heroes when I started doing public radio. Obviously, Marion Partland was one, the way she talked to musicians, and Billy Taylor was another. And I learned a lot from them. And then, you know, liner notes, man, Nat Hentoff, Ira Gittler, you know, these cats, you know, the way they interacted. Leonard Feather would be a little high and mighty, but still, he was kind of in the trenches with the cats. And when I say demystify, what I mean is, my joke is, jazz musicians are just like the rest of us, only more so. You know, they're like, they're sensitive to certain aspects of what we're all going through. And so that's how I approached, whether it was Sonny Rollins or some kid just playing one of his early dates, man. This is a calling, you know, and the guys that I grew up with, and they were my elders, let me know that this is a spiritual calling, that this is not trivial what we're doing, that it's a serious part of the human story and the human condition. And at the same time, there's nothing greater than being a person. You know, you're not trying to get out of this alive. You're just trying to live this thing. So when I would approach, I mean, I particularly, you know, I talked to so many cats, but I particularly remember the day Gil Evans came into the recording studio to do this interview. And he had kind of a tough day, a particularly difficult day. And he walked in, and I said, "Man, you look great, Gil." And he said, "Yeah," he said, "I feel good, except when I look in the mirror, man. I can't believe it, you know." And right away, we were just two guys.
Right.
You know, and that was kind of the premise for all the conversations. I mean, I was, guess one of the most intimidating moments was trying to relax sitting next to Miles, but you know,
that ended up being one of your best interviews.
Yeah, he was great.
Right.
He was great. So the message that I took from this is that we're all here doing this thing, and nobody's got the handle on it, and nobody's got the answer to it. And so, you know, while we're on the planet, let's just be here together.
I remember vividly watching your show. I was in middle school and high school growing up in Indianapolis. So we didn't really have a big music scene, but we had some icons that came out of
You
Indy.
bet.
And the things that I just remember, I would take the little money that I would make and buy the musicians that I was exposed to watching your show, like Harry Connick Jr. I remember the episode of the World Saxophone Quartet. There was a Sun Ra episode, wasn't there?
That was fantastic.
Yes, there was a Sun Ra episode. And I think there was the one that I really loved was the Dr. John episode. Because you kind of set that up for me when I interviewed him some 20 years later. But you broke out some very important artists, including Courtney Pine. Did you know what you wanted to do as far as exposing these artists to a very different audience?
Well, we knew we were lucky to have a little slot on television. And whereas the normal television way to go would have been to find all the biggest names all the time. I mean, we were getting some pressure from up above to get Paul McCartney on the show. You know, hey man, can't you? No, I worked to get Sun Ra on the show. I said, man, Sun Ra on television, this has got to be great, man. We have to do this. And just because, in the case of Harry Connick Jr., that was his first TV appearance.
Yeah.
This was like a first for these guys, and they really brought who they were. They weren't hustling, they weren't promoting. They would show up and play, and we had a lot of funny stuff go down just because those moments were captured. I actually said to the producer of the show, the best way to do this show is not to have a set at all. Like, you know, we had a set that looked like a house, and you know, I said the real show is in the green room, man. We should have cameras in the green room where cats are sitting there meeting. I mean, the day Wynton Marsalis came on, David Byrne was going to come on next, and everybody was sitting in the green room. I thought, well, man, what a great show that would be. David Byrne And Winton just sitting around talking and blah, blah, blah. Doesn't have to be more than that. You don't need a set, you know. So I was constantly pushing in that direction because that's captured history. And I've always been very big. Like when I did the interview with Miles, I mean, you had to be a fool not to know that that conversation was going to be more important as time went on.
The thing I remember about this interview, now we're talking some 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm like I said, I'm in middle school, high school watching this. He's painting, and Foley is playing the guitar. I was like, and this wasn't scripted. This is what makes that stick out. You want to recall what happened during that interview? You want to talk about some of the highlights?
Well, sure. I mean, I went to his house in Malibu with my friend Tommy LiPuma, who was producing Tutu at the time. And we knocked on the door, and the door opened. There's Miles. You know, Miles at that point, he was thin, man. His health wasn't great, and he looked burnished, man. I mean, the image I had was having so many years of people staring at him. He was polished from the energy from people. Anyway, Tommy, you know, they hugged. Miles and Tommy hugged, and Tommy said, "Miles, this is my friend Ben," and Miles hugged me, and "Come on in, man," and it was just like that from the get-go. We sat around. Miles was making lunch. You guys want to eat? He cooked lunch for us. We sat around and talked. At one point, he actually was talking about Cicely. He was married to Cicely Tyson at the time. I said to him, you know, because he was drawing the whole time. I said, "Man, have you always been drawing?" He said, "Yeah, but I really started, you know, when I got together with Cicely, because you know how long it takes an actress to get together. Well, I just started drawing, you know, to pass time. And then one thing led to another." And he said, "Man, you know how women," he said, "Let me show you something." And he took us up to the closet to show us the amount of clothes Cicely had in the closet. I mean, it was just, it was a thrown away moment. There was nothing scripted about it, like you say. It was just being there with one of the funniest, greatest cats ever in a natural moment. And at one point, he turned to me and said, "So you want to interview me, huh?" I said, "Yeah, Miles, I do." He said, "Okay, man, fire away." And that was it.
When you're feeling so low, and what do you do when you're feeling so blue? Take a tip from one who knows, and live your life in a cool repose. Where do all the people go when it's time to start the show? You can bet they're on the set. Why don't you drop me off in Harlem? Where do all the people meet when they want to feel elite? They go uptown, fool around, and drop me off in Harlem. Every night they fuss and fight, but they do it with their homies. Nobody dies, there's no demise. They're too busy being born. It's still the final word today, still the sweetest getaway. Grab your axe, hit the tracks, drop me off in Harlem. Nobody dies, there's no demise, they're too busy being born. Still the final word today, still the sweetest getaway. Grab your axe, brother, hit the tracks. Drop me off in Harlem. Drop me off in Harlem. Drop me off in Harlem.
Ben, your musical history, I mean, it's all over the place. You're a writer, broadcaster, educator, record producer, executive, father, grandfather. I mean, you've worn and are wearing so many hats. Tell me about a part of your musicianship as a record producer. A record producer does many, many things. Can you tell me what your role as a record producer is and was?
Well, I always found the most natural way for me to behave in a recording studio when I was a producer was to facilitate the documentation of somebody's art. And by that I mean to try to get out of the way all the obstacles that normally come up. People are nervous, people have hopes, people might feel uncomfortable with the musicians. I mean, to how do you make all of these things melt away so you have a moment there where somebody can just be themselves? Because the thing about creating art is you don't really create it. You know, you're there and it's birthed through you in a way. But everybody goes in there thinking, I have to do something, I have to do this thing, and I have to be good. This is a moment, this is an important moment, when that attitude can get in the way. So I just do everything I can to make sure that there aren't money concerns. We try to solve that in advance, that the musicians are amenable to one another, that the recording engineer, the studio, all these things are comfortable. It's a situation where if it looks like I'm doing nothing, then I'm doing my job. That's my goal, and I got that from watching Tommy LiPuma work, because Tommy, he'd make these gorgeous records, you know, with George Benson. I've been to dozens of sessions with him, and it always looked like he wasn't doing anything. He was sitting there, he's being affable, maybe he'd say, let's do it again or something. But all his records came out sounding similar. He was doing something, but you couldn't see what it was. And so that's the style that I aspired to. Now, there are lots of different kinds of producers, and a lot of producers, like Phil Spector or whatever, are very hands-on and take number 120, you know. My philosophy was, if you don't have it by the third or fourth take, you probably should move on, you know, and come back to it later. You don't want to beat this thing up. So a classic example for me was being Mose Allison's producer. You know, I was a great admirer of Mose, and then I became a friend. We spent time together, and then Blue Note Records signed Mose and asked me to produce him, and they didn't give him much of a budget at all because Mose didn't sell many records. So, you know, every time we were going to work together, I just, you know, got as close to his idea of what the record was going to be, what the material was, we talk about it, and try to manifest it, try to bring it out of the conditions, you know, try to make it appear like we didn't have any problems. Like one time we were recording in New Orleans, and man, he didn't like New Orleans. He thought New Orleans was the quagmire. Nothing could get done there. And we went down there, and it was raining, it was pouring, it was a flood. The city was flooded, man. And we got to the studio we were supposed to record at, and the studio was flooded. It was running, the water was running down the walls, and we wound up having to record the record at a radio station where they had a recording desk. And the cats, you know, John Vodakovich and Tony, I forget the saxophone player, you know, we gathered there, and Mose was clearly, you know, he didn't want to be there. And my whole thing was to, you know, essentially say, put it on me, Mose, put it on me. Let me deal with it, man. Let you be there. Let me deal with it. And that was production for me.
Wow. I met Tommy through you. I have been blessed to interact and communicate with some of the very important record guys. You, Michael Cascuna, Tommy LiPuma, Joe Fields, Quincy Jones. The one thing I asked Tommy in passing, I said, what's two of the artists that you are the most proud that you produced? You won't believe what he said.
He probably would have said Little Jimmy Scott and Miles. That's my guess.
Little Jimmy Scott.
Yeah.
And Diana Krall.
And Diana Krall.
Diana Krall.
And he loved that.
Yeah, and the thing that I really loved about Tommy was that the end of the 70s, this guy introduced the world to a man by the name of Al Jarreau, Michael Franks, and he changed the whole musical trajectory of George Benson. How important is a producer as far as getting the vision out? Because sometimes vision can kill an artist also.
Yeah. Well, I know specifically with George Benson, you know, Creed Taylor did not want George to sing. He wanted George to follow up on the Wes Montgomery success. And when Tommy was at Warner's and had a chance to sign George Benson, he had actually just come from a gig in San Francisco where George was playing in a little club and George was singing. And he was totally knocked out with George's vocal. Well, George as a kid was a singer. George was always a singer. And when he had his first meetings with George, said, how come you're not singing on your records? And George said, well, you know, Creed didn't want me to sing. And Tommy said, well, you're going to sing and we're going to find a song for you. And there's a whole story about how they came upon This Masquerade, which of course Tommy had first recorded on a Leon Russell. Well, Leon produced it himself, but Leon was tied into Blue Thumb when it was Tommy's label, so he had a connection to the song. And but you know, Tommy understood that that's where George Benson lived, man. He lived in that sound, and the combination of his voice and his guitar was unique. So somebody like Tommy definitely was driven by music, but he made history. It's not like he did something for it to be historical. He was driven by music. The record he made with Little Jimmy Scott is just gorgeous, man.
Yeah.
It's just gorgeous. And he did that knowing that it was going to sell 5 copies. You know, he wasn't driven by history. He was driven by music.
Right. You know what's really funny? Piggybacking on what you said about George Benson. There was only one song on Reason. There were 6 songs. The follow-up record, there were 4 vocals and just 2 instrumentals.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right. He kind of knew that he had to start singing. It was time for him to go in a very different direction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and Tommy loves vocalists. I mean, that was Tommy's gift. Tommy's gift was working with singers. I mean, he made beautiful, like there's a Klaus Ogerman record called Gate of Dreams that Tommy made. Another record that sold 4 copies. Man. Just a spectacular record. Mike Brecker's on it, Sanborn's on a bunch of people. It's one of the great records, really. Doesn't sell, but you know, Tommy was, when he saw a musical opportunity to put together a great arranger and a great instrumentalist, he had to do it. He was just motivated because at heart he was a musician. He thought like a musician. He grew up as a musician. A lot of producers, you know, come up a different way. They come up as an executive, or they come up as an engineer. Tommy grew up as a tenor player.
Mm. The great Phil Ramone told me something about Billy Joel. And he said that before he started producing and having a role with Billy, that the live band members that he had in his band weren't recording with him. And he said when he took that component and put it into the studio, that was when Billy took off. Have you ever had that situation with musicians that you produced?
Using the band rather than session players?
Yes.
Well, I'll tell you, I personally had that experience when I started out and I was recording with my own band, my traveling band. And then I segued into recording with LA session players. And it's interesting how time changes your perspective. Because at the time, I was self-conscious about not having control in the studio. I didn't know how to bring out the best in me in the studio. So I thought the absence of mistakes was the goal. In retrospect, I look back at those early records that I played with my band, where there were plenty of mistakes, but they really hold up well.
Right.
And then you put them up against the session studio, and great players, man. John Guerin on drums and, you know, whatever. You can almost tell what year they were, what day they were recorded. They're so specific. There's no mistakes. I tell you an interesting little example. 1971, my first recording session, I went all over the world trying to find Blue Mitchell to be on that because I was just in love with Blue Mitchell. And Blue Mitchell didn't do recording dates. He was a jazz player. But I brought him in on this thing, and we were recording in Capitol Records. It was an overdub, so it was Blue out there playing a trumpet solo on top of the track. And I'm in there with the musician, with the engineer, and Blue's out there. And Blue sounds great, we're going ahead. And at one point, the engineer asked Blue to empty the spit valve on his horn, because he could hear it. And I thought, man, that's his sound. Don't tell him to change the sound because you think it's not clean.
Right.
That's who he is, man. And that was like my first indication that the recording process may not be entirely convivial to the music.
Or just a dark new age of complaints. When I become worse and we become worse, will there be any Susans or Ralphs? Looking at old photographs and wondering aloud to a friend, what was it like to be them?
George Duke told me this in an interview, that when he was putting down the raw tracks to the album he produced for Miles, he was giving it as a sketch of how the music was supposed to be laid out.
Mm-hmm.
So it get into the studio, and Miles looks at George Duke. He says, "What is this?" He said, "Oh no, that was just the rough take. This is." He said, "No, I want to play on the rough take that you gave me."
Mm-hmm.
So art does sometimes imitate life.
Hey, the first time I met and recorded with Phil Woods, it was 1977, and he was doing an overdub, and I had this 8-minute piece of music that was essentially based on Moose the Mooch, the old bebop tune, but I had this long rap that I put on the front of it about, now it doesn't matter what it was a story, and then it went into Moose, blah, 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 I had all these moving parts, and this was, and it's funny you mentioned Billy Joel, because just a few months before that, there was this Billy Joel song where Phil played the solo on it.
Just the way you are.
Just the Way You Are. And I remember hearing on the radio going, well, that's Phil Woods, but I wonder who that singer is, because I never knew. So I thought, wow, Phil's, you know, he's playing these record dates. I'm calling him up. So he comes into the studio, and we put the tape up, and he goes out, and Phil's, you know, hey baby, how you doing? What's happening? Blah, let's hit it. Blah, blah. He goes into the studio. He puts his horn together. He puts the earphones on. We don't have a sound up or anything. He gets his horn. He starts playing along with the tape. Never heard this thing before. He's playing along with it. He's playing along behind the vocal. Then there's a blanks. He plays a solo. He plays blah blah. He does this thing, man. It's like he's out on the wing of an airplane. He's just on the edge. You can feel he's leaning into the future. He doesn't know what's coming, but he's prepared. Okay, so not being an idiot, I recorded it. Now he's got the form. He's got his horn together. He's ready. We say, okay, here we go, and we record it. It's great, but it's not as great. So we do it again. It's less great. We used the take that he played when he had no idea what was going on. And that was the one.
Wow. That's the record you did on Horizon, right?
No, it's the one before that. It was on Arista.
Hipster, okay.
Yeah.
So you've been around great record guys. I mean, we think of Clive Davis as the person who resuscitated that label.
Yeah, that was his. Arista was his.
It's his. So, you know, as a record producer and even an executive, do you think that the record industry has been, what's the word I want to use? Has it been destroyed with the streaming?
Well, the streaming has been part of what's happened. Streaming was probably inevitable. I mean, the record industry shot itself in the foot. They were greedy. I always thought back in the day, man, record companies, they had a lot of money at the time. They should be developing like farm teams, like baseball do, you know. Have a bunch of guys over here you're developing and then bring them along. But record companies never did that. They just always went for the biggest hit possible. And you know, streaming is the child of Napster, you know, file sharing. And what the record companies did when Napster came along is they sued their audience, which is insane. What they should have done is use the radio model. You know, the radio model is if a record is played on the radio, you have something called ASCAP or BMI, and there's a little piece that goes to the company, a piece goes to the artist, and everybody gets played and the music gets promoted. But instead of that, the record companies were so possessive that they wanted to own the sound and own the music and sued people who didn't. Well, it was backwards, and one thing led to another, and people started file sharing, and when they started file sharing, they started thinking, well, I don't need to buy this CD for $13 when I was buying a record for $4. Why am I paying an extra $9? Well, the answer was the companies were greedy. It didn't cost them any more to make a CD. And this whole thing came apart. Streaming now, I'm sure you know, the record companies are still getting paid. The artists aren't getting paid.
Right. And I want to piggyback on something about, you know, like the farm team analogy. God rest their souls, Ahmet Ertegun and Jerry Wexler kind of had that with Atlantic Records. Even the story about Rufus Thomas's Walking the Dog is a remarkable story.
I don't know. Tell me.
Okay. This was the time when Atlantic had this distribution deal with Stax. And Tom Dowd happened to go to Stax Records. Now when he gets to Memphis and he goes to this this makeshift movie theater, he's looking like, where your isolation rooms? They're telling him, no, we do it all here. And he's scratching their head. So they had this, I guess, the where they were recording their the masters on. And apparently they were, Estelle Exton and her brother, they were at a place where they were about to buy another, I guess, recorder. And Tom Dowd, being the engineer that he was, he said, no, you don't have to buy that. The problem is your belt is messed up. We can go to Radio Shack and I can get you one for like 60 cents. And then when he put the new belt on, this is the legend. They had they had just recorded Walking the Dog. And he heard it for the first time, and Tom Dowd was like, this is a hit. So he took the tape to New York. Jerry Wexler, they were like, this is, and it's amazing how their idea of how records should be made, because remember too, they had Muscle Shoals, they used the Muscle Shoals, they used different parts of the country. They used
Miami.
Yes. And do you think that has another part of the system that really kind of we're missing now?
Yeah, well, just in general, I think what you're bringing up is the lack of regional sounds. Regional. There was a Kansas City sound, a Chicago sound, Joplin, Missouri sound. Now everything sounds like it comes from the studio. It's and this is, there's no going back, obviously, but the difference in our music is our music was originally captured. It was made out in the streets. It was presented to the people in a live situation, and then somebody like Anna or Jerry, whatever, would bring it into a room and press record. I mean, the original Atlantic records were made in the Atlantic offices. They'd moved those desks aside, and that's where Ray Charles recorded. That's captured music now. But once rock and roll came along, and you had multi-track machines, and you were starting to manufacture music. This music didn't exist outside of the recording studio. It was manufactured and then shipped out. And that subtle change was the beginning of our music becoming subject to all the forces of marketing and promotion and hype and everything else. And gradually, people became accustomed to a sound that wasn't like the natural environmental sound. It was like ear candy. It was all the things you could create with technology. And today we're living in a world where there's very little that's real, that's captured. Most of it is just manufactured. I mean, look at the TikTok world. I don't know anything about it. I don't watch it, but from what I understand, anybody with an iPhone who does a 30-second clip that's kind of cute has the opportunity to become a celebrity, because there's this little manufactured moment of their life. And it's a different world, man. It's just not where we were, and that's okay. I guess we got the best. That's how I feel. We got the best of it, man. We were lucky that we were here when giants walked the earth.
getting started. I didn't even have me. I didn't have a story I could tell. But now that I'm older, I got my own story. Oh, but it's the way that I tell it. Make them think and say. And I've been looking back at my misadventures. I've been wondering if there was a point somehow. I was looking for answers. Hell, I'm looking for questions. Oh, but take a look. Who's the old guy now? It could happen to you if you're lucky. Who's the old guy now? Who's the old guy now?
Less is more.
Mm-hmm.
We lost the great Roberta Flack a couple of months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And she kind of mirrored Shirley Horn.
Mm-hmm.
And you mirrored Mose Allison. And what is it about the intimacy of words and the intimacy of the piano that we're kind of missing in these times?
Yeah, well, there's words in the music and music in the words. It's common knowledge that there's music in language. I mean, even the way we're talking here, you know, our voices go up and down. It's called intonation contouring, man. It's just like music. There is music in language, but there's also language in music. And Mose used to say, Mose wouldn't sing if he wasn't playing piano. He wouldn't sing. Mose wouldn't stand up by a microphone and sing. The act of playing piano was one with the act of singing with Mose. You couldn't take them apart. And that's it. Nat King Cole, he could stand up and sing, of course, but he developed that whole thing as a piano player. There's something about piano players who sing. Fats Waller, it's a wonderful, wonderful tradition, and it really changed the way people sang, and it opened up a world to piano players who might not have ever gotten noticed. So I tried at first to find a way to avoid being a singer, because I was never a natural singer. And the first record deal I got was with Capitol Records in 1971. And in 1971, if a big label like Capitol Records signed you, you were a singer-songwriter. That's who they signed. And I told the guy who signed me, I said, I got this idea, I'm writing these tunes, and I've recorded with Steve Miller and Boz Scaggs and all these cats, Eric Clapton. So these guys are going to sing on my record. The guy looked at me and said, no, man. He said, if you're going to record for us, you're going to sing. You're going to be a singer. First time I ever sang in my life was at Capitol Records with the Frank Sinatra $10,000 microphone in my face, and I opened my mouth and I had earphones on. I'd never heard my voice in earphones, and man, I thought I heard my father's voice. I just completely, you know, it was just the weirdest experience. So it took me a long time to put together the fact that what I did naturally was what I was supposed to do. My first thought was I was supposed to sound like Steve Miller, or I was supposed to sound like Mose Allison, I was supposed to sound something. No. Get all that artifice out of the way. Who are you? You be that guy. Well, you know, when you're sitting in a piano singing, you are that guy. that is who you're supposed to be. And I think that's why you get these stylists, these great stylists, because when you support yourself at the piano, your music has words and the words have music.
And you know, we talk about piano singers. We talk like Charles Brown.
Oh.
We talk about Aretha Franklin and Sarah. Those were the complete package.
Yes.
Because I don't think Charles Brown would be a very prolific artist as he was if he did not play the piano.
Oh my goodness, no. Oh my, no. What a phenomenon Charles Brown was.
And he's criminally underrated. Very criminally underrated, because we kind of skip Charles Brown and go into like
Nat King Cole.
Nat King Cole, right? Yeah. And then also when we move into the rock era, we go into Little Richard.
Yes, yes. But we forget Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
You know, when I was doing the Sidran on Record show in the 80s, I tracked Charles down. He was living in Oakland. He was totally obscure, man. He wasn't working. He wasn't doing anything. He was every bit as great as he had been 40 years before. He was the sweetest man and so gifted. And I did this radio show with him where we talked about his career and we listened to his style. And, you know, back in that day, people were 100% who they were. They weren't trying to do something. Today, people are trying real hard to make their way, to make a living, to make some money, to get ahead, to get some publicity, all this stuff. Man, he was Charles Brown. That's what he was doing. That's who he was. His heart was on his sleeve. He was an inspiration, man. And his life was so hard, man. He had such a hard time. But it didn't change him. He kept the faith.
And I'm glad we were talking about him, because the last 10, 15 years he got his roses. Those records he recorded with Verve.
Yeah.
Those rounded records he did. And then Donald Fagen, I mean, he resuscitated him. He gave him, I believe, and I continue to say this, and I'll say this till I go to the grave. He gave Mr. Brown his roses with that Rock and Soul Review thing. The world really got to see the very last end of his legacy.
Mm-hmm. And Donald Fagen, that's who he is, man. Donald Fagen is a deep, deep jazz fan. And he doesn't have time for anybody who doesn't know the tradition. And I respect him enormously for that.
That'll do it again for another edition of the Pace Report. I'm Brian Pace, reporting from Mezzrow here in the West Village here in New York City. I'd like to personally thank the incomparable Ben Sidran for his time. Make sure you support his brand new album, Are We There Yet?, which is now available on Nardist Records. It's available on iTunes, Amazon.com, as well as bensidran.com. Also visit him on social media to find out his upcoming tour dates. I'd like to personally thank the staff and management here at Mezzrow for their warm hospitality. Also, I'd like to give a mad shout out to Leo Sidran for arranging my time with Dr. Sidran. As always, people, I can't stress this more than enough. Please like, share, and subscribe to my videos, as well as leave comments on YouTube, as well as Vimeo, as well as follow me on social media by way of Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Until next time, remember, if it's in the groove, it'll make you move. Till next time, peace.